In a world still shadowed by prejudice and inequality, Black LGBTQ+ individuals must battle not only for success, but for survival. They rise like blazing stars, captivating audiences and conquering Hollywood's highest peaks, all while carrying identities that society too often tries to erase. Their brilliance shines bright, but behind the spotlight, they face obstacles few can imagine. And when illness strikes, it doesn't just wound, it devastates. From red carpets to hospital beds, from applause to silence, these 19 Black stars carved out legacies that still echo through time. Their journeys are filled with beauty, pain, triumph, and heartbreak. Are you ready to discover the powerful stories of those who touched fame, yet quietly slipped into tragedy? Don't look away, because their truth will move you like nothing else. Little Richard. Little Richard, the flame that rocked the world, and burned in silence. Little Richard wasn't just a musician, he was a wildfire. Born in 1932 in Macon, Georgia, he lit the match that sparked rock and roll into an uncontrollable blaze. With his pompadour hair, glittering jackets, and an electrifying voice that sent shockwaves through the Apollo Theater in 1955, he didn't just perform, he erupted. Tutti Frutti wasn't just a song, it was a cultural explosion. But behind the dazzling showmanship was a man tormented by a truth he couldn't speak out loud. Richard was a gay Black man in 1950s America, a place and time that labeled his love a sin and his spirit a threat. Off stage, his lipstick and rhinestones drew sneers, not applause. His manager once whispered backstage, "You make the world dance, just don't let them know who you love." Richard nodded, heart pounding, fingers trembling. The stage was his escape, but never his sanctuary. The fame was blinding. So was the loneliness. He sought solace in drugs, parties, and fleeting affairs hidden in the shadows. He loved deeply, but in secret. And each standing ovation echoed hollow in the silence of his private sorrow. Then, in 1984, under the bright lights of a Rolling Stone interview, Little Richard finally said it, "I'm gay and I'm proud." That one sentence cracked open decades of shame and denial. For the first time, he wasn't just the architect of rock and roll, he was free. But even freedom has its limits. In the fall of 2019, Richard lay in a quiet Nashville home, ravaged by cancer. The sparkle in his eyes still flickered, faint but unyielding. When asked about chemotherapy, he simply smiled and said to his sister, Leah May, "I lived for music. I loved despite their rules. Now let God take me." On a warm morning in May 2020, Little Richard passed away at 87. But he didn't vanish. His fire never went out. He left us with thunderous rhythms, and a life that was both a revolution and a requiem. He was the joy on stage and the ache behind it. A man torn between faith and identity, love and shame, light and shadow, until finally he chose to live as he truly was. Luther Vandross. Luther Vandross, the voice of love and the weight of silence. Born in 1951 in New York City, Luther Vandross was more than just an R&B icon. He was the golden voice of romance, the smooth velvet that wrapped around a generation's most intimate moments. With 8 Grammy Awards and over 40 million records sold, he soared to stardom with the 1981 release of Never Too Much, a breakthrough album that turned him into a legend overnight. But behind the spotlight lived a man hiding his deepest truth. Luther was a gay man in an industry, and a time, that was unforgiving. He poured his heart into every lyric, yet he never had the chance to live openly as his authentic self. During a packed performance at Madison Square Garden, a reporter once asked him, "Luther, who do you love?" He smiled, gently dodged the question, but for a split second, sadness flickered behind his eyes. A close friend would later say, he loved deeply. But he had to hide everything, for fear of losing it all. Whispers about his sexuality began to circulate, but Luther chose silence over scandal. He let his music speak louder than words. In the 90s, his success only grew, but so did the pressure to remain flawless. Behind closed doors, he quietly battled diabetes and the toll of rapid weight gain. On sleepless nights in his Harlem apartment, he would replay A House Is Not a Home, not just singing, but aching, for the kind of love he had to keep in the dark. Then, in April 2003, tragedy struck. A sudden stroke left him in a coma. When he woke, the voice that once captivated millions was gone. In a quiet hospital room, sunlight trickling through the curtains, Luther turned to his sister Patricia and whispered, "I sang for the world, but never for myself." Tears welled in his eyes, not from regret, but perhaps from the beginning of self-forgiveness. In July 2005, the world lost Luther Vandross at just 54. He was a man whose voice touched hearts, even as his own remained hidden. His was a life of brilliance and burden. A soul who gave the world everything, except the chance to love in the open. In the end, he didn't just sing love songs. He was the love song, aching, beautiful, and forever longing. Sylvester. Sylvester, the king of disco and an unextinguished flame. Born in 1947 in the heart of Watts, Los Angeles, Sylvester wasn't just a singer. He was a revolution wrapped in sequins. With a soaring falsetto that could pierce the soul and a stage presence that lit up every room, he became the undisputed king of disco. But behind the glitter and glam was a man carrying a truth that the world wasn't ready to accept. Sylvester was unapologetically gay in a time when that truth could cost you everything. One sweltering night in the summer of 1977, backstage at Studio 54, the air was thick with the scent of perfume and anticipation. As Sylvester fixed his curls in the mirror, fellow performer Tony leaned in and whispered, "Are you really going to tell them? Be careful, they won't forgive you." Sylvester smiled gently, but his heart beat like a war drum. He grabbed his rhinestone-studded mic and stepped onto the stage. His voice shattered every barrier, but off-stage they called him eccentric, too much, too loud. Yet he refused to dim his light. As the disco era faded into the 1980s, Sylvester stayed true to his sound, releasing the electrifying "Do You Wanna Funk?" and refusing to vanish with the glitter balls. Then, he did something even bolder. He came out publicly, standing in full truth at a time when being openly gay could be a death sentence. And then, like a cruel twist of fate, the AIDS epidemic hit. In 1986, Sylvester tested positive for HIV. Holding the results, his hands shook, but his voice didn't. Looking into Tony's eyes, he said, "I won't stop singing, even if it's with my last breath." 2 years later, frail but regal in a flowing red cloak, he appeared on stage at San Francisco Pride. The crowd hushed. Then, as he belted out "You Make Me Feel Mighty Real," the silence exploded into thunderous cheers. Sweat poured down his brow. His breathing was shallow. But his eyes? They burned with defiance. Not long after, beneath the dim buzz of fluorescent lights and the sterile scent of antiseptic, Sylvester lay in a hospital bed. At just 41 years old, his body was failing, but his spirit refused to fade. He clutched Tony's hand and whispered, "Let my music live. Let them remember that I loved, and I sang without regret." He closed his eyes with a soft smile, like a candle flickering in the dark, still refusing to go out. On a cold December day in 1988, Sylvester passed away from AIDS-related complications. But death could not silence him. His legacy still pulses through every dance floor, every anthem of pride, every soul brave enough to live loudly and love freely. He didn't just sing disco, he embodied it. Fierce. Fabulous. Forever mighty real. Nell Carter. Nell Carter, the stage's brightest smile and her silent truth. Born in 1948 in Birmingham, Alabama, Nell Carter lit up every stage she touched. A powerhouse vocalist with soul-deep emotion and a Tony Award winner for Ain't Misbehavin', she enchanted Broadway and television audiences alike. But behind that dazzling smile was a heart weighed down by silence. In a time when being openly lesbian in show business could cost you everything, Nell hid her truth, folding it quietly into the shadows behind the curtain. One winter night in 1978, beneath golden stage lights and the scent of warm stage wood, Nell sang Mean to Me with a voice that shimmered like jazz itself. Raw, aching, unforgettable. The audience leapt to their feet, crowning her a diva. But with fame came a cruel demand: perfection. Whispers about her private life swirled in the press, and Nell, afraid of losing it all, chose secrecy over freedom. Her close friend Rosa once said, she loved deeply, but fear forced her to forget her own heart. To protect her image, Nell entered a short-lived marriage, burying her desires beneath exhausting rehearsals and TV tapings. By the 1990s, she was quietly fighting diabetes. In the stillness of her New York apartment, a cold coffee nearby, she would sometimes hold a faded photo of her lover, Vivian, and whisper, "One day, I'll live as me." During a taping of Gimme a Break, her son Joshua once asked, "Mom, why don't you ever talk about her?" Nell turned away, her eyes damp, her voice caught, her smile dimmed. Years later, in a sterile Los Angeles hospital room, the smell of antiseptic sharp in the air, Nell, now 54, lay weakened from complications of diabetes. As the lights faded, she reached for Vivian's hand and whispered, "I lived for the applause, but you were my home." Her final smile flickered softly, like a stage light refusing to go dark. Nell Carter passed in the spring of 2003, leaving behind not only a legacy of unforgettable performances but also a quiet ache, the pain of a love the world never let her fully live. Behind the brilliance was a woman whose deepest scars were hidden beneath a lifetime of applause. Moms Mabley. Moms Mabley wasn't just the queen of comedy, she was the heartbeat of resilience wrapped in a joke. Born Loretta Mary Aiken in 1894 in Brevard, North Carolina, Jackie Moms Mabley shattered every barrier the world tried to place before her. With her signature toothless grin, oversized hats, and biting wit, she became a beloved figure on the comedy circuit, bringing joy to audiences from smoky clubs to the grand stage of Carnegie Hall. But behind every laugh was a woman hiding a heavy truth. Moms was a lesbian in a time when even whispering such a thing could ruin a life, or end it. Beneath the spotlight, her private world remained cloaked in secrecy. One humid summer night in 1925, while performing on the Chitlin circuit, the scent of beer thick in the air, she wore a bright patchwork dress and spun hilarious tales about black life that had the crowd howling. But outside the laughter, love was dangerous. That same year, in a dim Harlem bar, just as she leaned in to whisper to her lover Bessie, the police stormed in. Her body stiffened, her voice barely audible. "If they find out, they won't let me go." The fear wasn't just of the law, but of losing the community she loved so fiercely. Still, she rose. In 1962, Moms made history performing at Carnegie Hall, an elderly black lesbian making a white audience cry with laughter. Yet, her body was beginning to betray her. Heart disease clawed at her strength, each step heavier, each breath more labored. But she never stopped. Her pain stayed behind the curtain, her smile never left the stage. Then came 1974. The Apollo Theater pulsed with energy as Moms walked out one final time. The crowd cheered, unaware her heart was failing. She cracked a joke, wiped sweat from her brow, and grinned, mischievous as ever, even as her chest ached with every beat. By spring 1975, her laughter had grown faint. In a quiet New York hospital room, pale light falling across her face, 81-year-old Moms held her granddaughter Lena's hand. Her voice was soft but unshaken. "Don't let them make you sad. Keep laughing, just like me." Her eyes sparkled one last time, as if the Apollo lights still shone inside them. Then, they gently closed. Jackie Moms Mabley passed away on May 23, 1975, from heart failure. She left behind a legacy of courage, comedy, and truth. Though the world once judged the love she carried, her greatest act was never the joke. It was the strength to laugh through a heart that quietly carried so much pain. Alberta Hunter. Alberta Hunter, the blues voice and a hidden love. Born in 1895 in Memphis, Tennessee, Alberta Hunter rose from humble beginnings to become one of the most powerful voices in American blues and jazz. Her song Downhearted Blues crowned her the queen of the genre in 1923, her smoky voice echoing through Harlem's Apollo Theater, lifting spirits while hiding her own. Behind that dazzling smile, Alberta carried a secret, one the world wasn't ready for. She was a lesbian. In a backstage dressing room in 1927 Chicago, Alberta ran her fingers along the silk of her dress as fellow performer Clara leaned in and whispered, "Your voice is like an angel's, but please keep your love hidden." Alberta gave a silent nod, gripping the pendant around her neck, her expression warm but weary. She lit up stages across Europe, recorded for Paramount, and etched her name into music history. But the love she found in Paris, with a woman whose name never made the papers, had to be lived in shadows. Their moments were stolen, their smiles cautious. Fear stole her joy, drained her soul, and dulled the fire in her music. In 1957, she stepped away from the stage, trading applause for quiet nights as a nurse, hiding in plain sight. But Alberta's love for music never died. In the 1970s, in her 80s, she made a triumphant return to the spotlight at the Cookery in New York. Her voice was softer, but every lyric was soaked in raw, unfiltered emotion. Still, illness crept in, kidney failure gnawed at her body. Every note she sang was a fight. In 1984, Alberta walked onto the Apollo stage for the final time. The crowd roared, unaware of her pain, as sweat rolled down her face and her hand clutched her side. But her eyes still burned with the same fire she carried as a young woman. That fall, in a small Harlem apartment dimly lit by golden lamplight and the scent of antiseptic, Alberta lay in bed, her breath shallow. She took her niece Ella's hand, her voice raspy but clear, "Sing, even if the world doesn't listen. I loved, even when they said I shouldn't." And then she smiled, soft, defiant, eternal. Alberta Hunter died that autumn at 89, her body failing from leukemia, but her spirit blazing on. Her voice, rich, aching, triumphant, masked a life filled with wounds the world never saw. She lived for the stage, but her truest self remained hidden in the shadows of a society that never made space for her love. And still she sang. Gladys Bentley. Gladys Bentley, the drag king with an unbreakable soul. Born in 1907 in Philadelphia, Gladys Bentley wasn't just a blues singer, she was a revolution draped in a tuxedo. A fearless trailblazer of the Harlem Renaissance, she stormed the stage as one of America's first celebrated drag kings, her deep voice and commanding presence breaking every rule written for women of her time. Under the smoky lights of Harlem's nightclubs, where jazz and rebellion danced hand in hand, Gladys dared to live out loud. In a crisp suit, she sang about same-sex love with unapologetic honesty, making audiences swoon and authorities squirm. But behind the spotlight was a woman constantly at war with the world around her. Her lesbian identity, bold on stage, was battered by society's scorn in private. One night in the late 1920s, as the scent of cigars curled through the air and piano keys rang with desire, police raided yet another gay club. Gladys stood frozen in the chaos, sweat on her brow, whispering to a lover named Mabel, "I sing to survive, even fear can't stop my truth." From Harlem to Los Angeles, she never stopped performing, never stopped loving. But the 1950s brought a cruel storm. During the Cold War era's moral panic, Gladys was pressured into wearing dresses, claiming she'd been cured of her homosexuality, just to preserve what remained of her career. Yet deep down, her heart still beat for Harlem's golden age. In her final years, illness gripped her body, but not her spirit. In a dim Los Angeles apartment, the air tinged with medicine and memory, she wrote music with tired hands and unwavering eyes. In 1960, her voice, raspy but resolute, echoed one last time at the Apollo, a farewell performance laced with defiance and beauty. On a quiet winter day, Gladys lay in bed, her breath shallow, her sister Beatrice's hand in hers. She smiled, softly, bravely, before closing her eyes as if her blues had finally found peace. She passed on January 18, 1960, her voice silenced, but her legacy eternal. Gladys Bentley didn't just sing the blues, she lived them. Her pain was real, her love condemned, but her courage remains a song that still dares to be heard. Because in the face of judgment, living your truth is the greatest triumph of all. Billy Preston. Billy Preston, the musical genius with a hidden heart. Born in 1946 in Houston, Texas, Billy Preston was a child prodigy whose fingers danced over gospel keys long before he could even understand the way to fame. He would go on to dazzle the world with soul hits like Nothing from Nothing, sharing stages with legends and winning Grammys. But behind every chord he played was a secret, one that gnawed at his spirit in silence. Billy was a gay black man in an industry and era that offered no space for authenticity. He shined under the spotlight, yet lived in the shadows. In a recording studio one autumn afternoon in 1970, he sat at the piano, adjusting the keys with meticulous care. His smile lit up the room, but his eyes betrayed a deep loneliness. On stage, when he performed Will It Go Round in Circles, the crowd roared with applause, the scent of wine in the air, but off stage, he was haunted by the fear of being truly seen. The pressure to hide his true self pushed him into drugs. One quiet night in 1980, alone in his smoky Los Angeles apartment, Billy gazed at a photo of his lover and whispered, "One day, I'll live free." That day came in 1991, when Billy bravely came out as gay. He got clean, returned to church, and poured his soul into gospel once more. It was like music saved him, a friend would later recall. But the years of pain had taken a toll. His kidneys failed, and by 2005, he was confined to a hospital bed, still writing music with trembling hands. In 2006, during a gospel concert in Atlanta, Billy played the organ one last time. His body frail, but his eyes burning bright, filled with spirit. That summer in an Arizona hospital, Billy lay quietly, his breath shallow. He smiled softly, his gaze like a hymn, and then closed his eyes, fading into the eternal rhythm of the universe. Billy Preston passed away in June 2006. His greatest sorrow was the love he had to hide for too long. But his legacy is not one of silence. It's one of brilliance, resilience, and music that told the truth his heart couldn't always say aloud. And in that truth lies his most beautiful song. Frankie Knuckles. Frankie Knuckles, the godfather of house music and the heartbeat of liberation. Born in 1955 in the Bronx, New York, Frankie wasn't just a DJ. He was a visionary who rewrote the rules of music, blending soul, disco, and electronic beats into something raw, real, and revolutionary. With his gifted hands and unshakable spirit, he built a sound that gave life to a movement. But behind the booming bass lines and euphoric crowds, Frankie carried a secret: his identity as a gay man in a world still drenched in prejudice. In 1977, beneath flashing neon lights and pulsing speakers, Frankie stood behind the turntables at Chicago's Warehouse Club, headphones around his neck, soul in every track. When he dropped Your Love, the room erupted. Bodies moved as one, and for a moment, freedom was real. Yet even as he smiled behind the booth, his heart beat with a quiet ache, a loneliness that even music couldn't drown out. The AIDS crisis stole many of his closest friends, leaving him grieving but not broken. Frankie faced the darkness with courage, coming out publicly and defiantly in a world still steeped in fear. One quiet night in 1990, by the dim glow of candles in his Chicago apartment, he wrote to his soul brother, Larry Levon, "I'll play music to save us." And he did. Even after being diagnosed with diabetes in 2004, with swollen feet and burning pain, Frankie kept touring, spinning tracks around the world. His friend Maria once said, "Frankie turned pain into rhythm." And she was right. In 2014, as his health declined, he handpicked the final track for Housemasters. At a packed club, he stood one last time behind the decks. His hands trembled, his body frail, but the crowd roared, lost in the sound he had spent a lifetime creating. That spring, in a Chicago hospital room, Frankie Knuckles held his sister Kelly's hand. With tears in his eyes, he whispered, "I lived authentically. I made them dance. And the music won't die." On a March morning in 2014, the world lost a pioneer. But Frankie Knuckles didn't just play music, he gave people a reason to feel free. Through discrimination, illness, and heartache he rose. And in doing so, he left behind a rhythm that still moves us. Because legends don't fade. They echo. Wilmer Little Axe Broadnax. Wilmer Little Axe Broadnax, the tenor voice that carried faith and a hidden truth. Born in 1916 in Houston, Texas, Wilmer Little Axe Broadnax possessed a voice that could lift souls and silence crowds. A soaring tenor that became a cornerstone of American gospel in the 1940s and 50s. But behind the heavenly sound was a man burdened by a secret he was never allowed to share. Wilmer was a transgender and gay man, living in a time when such truths could destroy careers and cost lives, especially in the deeply conservative religious circles he sang within. With the Spirit of Memphis Quartet in the early 1950s, Little Axe's voice turned songs like Milky White Way into sacred experiences. Every time he stepped on stage, adjusting his glasses with quiet determination, his voice carried conviction. But inside he trembled, not from stage fright, but from the constant fear of being outed, rejected, or erased by the very community that praised his gifts. In a dim Atlanta hotel room in 1955, he confided in his brother, whispering, "I sing for God, but they won't accept me." That haunting truth followed him for years. In 1960, he made the brave decision to live openly, coming out at a time when such honesty came at a steep cost. The backlash forced him into the shadows of the very world he helped build. By 1980, lung cancer began to steal his breath, but not his spirit. He continued recording with the Blind Boys of Alabama, pouring what was left of his strength into every note. Then in 1992, in a small Philadelphia venue, he returned for one final performance, singing "The Lord is My Sunshine" with trembling passion, as if offering his soul back to the heavens. That same summer, in the quiet of his Philadelphia apartment, Little Axe sat alone in a chair, lungs failing, heart heavy with more than illness. He slipped away not just from this world, but from a lifetime spent hiding. Lung cancer claimed his life, but the deeper wound was the silence he was forced to carry. A man of immense grace and talent, denied the freedom to live his truth, except through the sacred power of song. His voice may have been stilled, but his legacy sings louder than ever. J.D. Steele. J.D. Steele, Minnesota's hidden gospel flame. Born in 1960 in Gary, Indiana, J.D. Steele became a cornerstone of Minnesota's gospel music scene. A voice that lifted congregations and stirred souls. But behind the harmonies and hallelujahs was a truth he kept tucked away. J.D. was a gay man in a world that wasn't ready to hear his full song. Each time his fingers danced across the piano keys, his eyes burned with a fire of both passion and pain. Longing to be seen, but afraid of the cost. In the 1980s, his powerful voice soared with sounds of blackness, echoing through the Twin Cities and earning thunderous applause. But when J.D. Bravely came out, the applause dimmed into whispers, and the same community that once praised him met him with cold, judgmental stares. As the 2010s wore on, his heart began to falter. Breathing became a struggle, but he never stopped creating. Music was his sanctuary, a sacred space where he could finally be free. Even in 2020, frail and hospitalized, his trembling hands tried to scribble one last song. In the fall of 2021, beneath the soft hum of machines and the sterile scent of antiseptic, J.D. lay in a quiet Minneapolis hospital room. Golden light spilled across the bed as he clutched his sister Frida's hand. With tears in his eyes, he whispered, "I sang for freedom, though they didn't understand." He smiled gently, then closed his eyes, his final note fading like a hymn into eternity. J.D. Steele passed away at 61 from heart failure. But his greatest sorrow wasn't death, it was living so long in silence. Still, his gospel legacy is a reminder to live truthfully, even when the world isn't ready to listen. Ethel Waters. Ethel Waters wasn't just a performer, she was a revolution draped in velvet and song. Born in 1896 in Chester, Pennsylvania, she shattered ceilings as the first black woman to star on Broadway and earn an Oscar nomination for her haunting role in Pinky. But behind the spotlight, Ethel carried a secret heartbreak, her love for dancer Ethel Williams, a forbidden romance in a time that demanded silence. In the 1920s, she reigned as Harlem's unofficial queen. At the Cotton Club, her voice floated through the haze of cigar smoke like a ghost from another world. Soulful, bold, and unbreakable. She tore through Hollywood's color lines with grace and grit, even as the price was hiding the truth of who she loved. Whispers followed her. She sings to silence her fear. By 1970, uterine cancer ravaged her body, but not her spirit. Even as her hands trembled, she still signed autographs with a warm smile and eyes that had seen too much. In 1977, she turned down a final role, not because the fire was gone, but because her heart had grown tired. That autumn, Ethel Waters took her final bow. Her greatest sorrow was never being able to love openly. Yet, her courage lit a path through history, so that one day, someone like her could love freely, sing boldly, and live without apology. Her voice still echoes, not just in music halls, but in the hearts of every dreamer she made room for. Howard Rollins. Howard Rollins, the barrier-breaking star Hollywood wasn't ready for. Born in 1950 in Baltimore, Maryland, Howard Rollins rose to fame as the brilliant star of In the Heat of the Night, becoming a household name across America. But behind the polished performances and red carpet smiles was a man forced to conceal a fundamental truth: his identity as a gay black man in an industry that demanded silence over authenticity. In the 1980s, Howard's talent lit up television screens, and his charisma commanded the stage. Yet whispers about his sexuality pushed him into the shadows, isolating him in the very spotlight he had earned. In 1990, Howard was diagnosed with AIDS, and the illness swiftly took its toll. Still, he refused to surrender to despair or distance himself from the craft he loved. In the final days of 1996, in a dim hospital room in New York, with antiseptic in the air and winter pressing against the windows, Howard grasped a friend's hand and whispered through weary eyes, "I lived fully, even if it cost me everything." He smiled, one last, gentle curtain call, and drifted into silence. Howard Rollins passed away that winter, but his legacy burns bright. Though he was denied the freedom to live openly in his time, his courage and talent carved out a path for the next generation of black actors, ones who wouldn't have to choose between their truth and their dreams.
Tamara Dobson.
Tamara Dobson was more than just a screen siren. She was a revolution wrapped in beauty, boldness, and mystery. Born in 1947 in Baltimore, Maryland, she stormed into Hollywood like a force of nature, commanding attention as the fierce and fashionable Cleopatra Jones. At a time when black women were rarely seen as heroes, Tamara redefined what it meant to be powerful, stunning, and unapologetically black. But behind the glamorous facade and the roar of applause, Tamara carried a quiet, personal truth: she was a lesbian. In an era when being true to oneself meant risking everything, she kept her love hidden, locked away behind the curtain of her rising fame. Through the 1970s, she dominated the screen with a presence that was impossible to ignore. Cleopatra Jones wasn't just a character, she was a symbol of strength, a beacon for black empowerment. But when the cameras stopped rolling, Tamara returned to the shadows, protecting a part of herself the world wasn't ready to embrace. In the early 2000s, as lung cancer slowly took her light, Tamara turned down final roles and quietly disappeared from the spotlight. In 2006, with trembling hands, she penned a heartfelt thank you letter to her fans, a farewell from a woman who had given her all, yet held so much back. That fall, in a quiet Baltimore apartment, bathed in soft, fading light, Tamara held her sister's hand and smiled through tears. Then, peacefully, she closed her eyes. Tamara Dobson passed away not just as an actress, but as a woman who bore the weight of silence for a truth she couldn't share. Her greatest sorrow was not in the roles she never played, but in the love she had to hide. Still, her legacy roars louder than ever, a lasting reminder that real strength isn't about fitting an image. It's about having the courage to exist. Sterling St. Jacques. Sterling St. Jacques was more than a model, he was a moment in time. Born in 1957 in New York, he embodied the fantasy of freedom, seduction, and unapologetic self-expression. As one of the first openly gay black male models, Sterling broke barriers with every step he took, whether on the runway, the silver screen in Eyes of Laura Mars, or the glittering dance floors of Studio 54. In 1978, when disco ruled the night and Studio 54 was heaven on earth, Sterling wasn't just a guest, he was the glow. His radiant skin shimmered beneath strobe lights, turning heads and capturing hearts. He graced the cover of Vogue, not just as a fashion icon, but as a symbol of boldness and liberation. Yet, beneath the glamour and the spotlight, Sterling carried a quiet ache. Society still hadn't caught up with the freedom he represented. Surrounded by crowds, he often walked alone. Then came 1984, the year liver cancer began to steal his shine. But Sterling didn't fade quietly. He returned to Studio 54, his smile defiant, his presence as magnetic as ever. He danced like time didn't exist, because for him, the moment was eternity. That same year, at just 27 sterling, Saint Jacques passed away. Cancer may have taken his life, but it could never touch his legacy. His impact on fashion, queer culture, and black representation still pulses like a disco beat. Timeless, fearless, unforgettable.
Sahara Davenport.
Sahara Davenport was more than a performer. He was a radiant force of artistry and authenticity. Born in 1984 in Dallas, Sahara rose to national fame as a standout on Season 2 of RuPaul's Drag Race, captivating audiences with his elegance, power, and unapologetic presence. Openly gay and fiercely proud, he lit up stages across the country throughout the 2010s, from New York's electric nightlife to intimate club corners, where the scent of liquor, thumping beats, and neon lights melted into his every move. Each performance was a declaration, bold, graceful, unforgettable. But behind the sequins and spotlight, his heart was quietly fading. Battling heart disease, Sahara knew his time was slipping away, but he refused to let it steal his spotlight. In 2012, even while hospitalized, he rehearsed for what would be his final show. His hands trembled around the mic, but his voice, strong, proud, unshaken, rose above the silence. That night, he didn't just perform.
He triumphed.
Later that fall, in a quiet hospital room in Baltimore, Sahara Davenport passed away from heart failure. But his real heartbreak wasn't just an early death. It was the toll of living every moment fighting to be seen, to be free, to be real. And yet, in doing so, Sahara became immortal. Not just a star, but a beacon.
Essex Hemphill.
Essex Hemphill, the poet who dared to speak truth on stage. Born in 1957 in Chicago, Essex Hemphill was more than a poet. He was a fearless truth-teller, a stage presence that burned with honesty, and a proud gay black man in a time when being any one of those things was an act of defiance. In the quiet corners of coffeehouses and the dim lights of small stages, his words weren't just poems. They were confessions, prayers, and protests wrapped in rhythm. His voice echoed the pain and power of an entire generation too often silenced. As AIDS crept through his body, Essex never flinched. He wrote through the ache, performed through the fear. In the 1980s and early 90s, he became a beacon for black LGBTQ+ Americans, his poetry slicing through shame and stigma with unwavering grace. In 1995, with trembling hands and a heart full of history, he penned his final poem, a love letter to life, to truth, and to those lost too soon. His last performance, a play about AIDS, left the audience in sobs. Essex didn't cry, but his reddened eyes carried the sorrow of 1,000 unspoken stories. He passed away that same year. The world may have taken its time to truly hear him, but it will never forget him. His legacy, bold verses, aching honesty, and soul-deep performances, still pulses in the hearts of black LGBTQ+ voices today.
Bobby DeBarge.
Bobby DeBarge, the heartbreaking voice of R&B. Born in 1956 in Grand Rapids, Michigan, Bobby DeBarge wasn't just the lead singer of Switch, he was its soul. A rare talent with a falsetto that could break your heart and a presence that lit up the stage, Bobby soared to R&B stardom in the late 70s with unforgettable hits like There'll Never Be. Under the glittering lights of smoky clubs, his voice cut through the noise, haunting, beautiful, and achingly human. He lived with a quiet courage, openly gay in a time when the world was far less forgiving. But behind the music, Bobby battled demons that fame couldn't silence: addiction, heartbreak, and the devastating toll of AIDS. Even as his body faded, his spirit didn't. In hospital beds, frail but unbroken, he continued to write and sing, his voice still as pure as it had ever been. When Bobby passed away in the summer of 1995, the world lost a voice too brilliant to burn for long. But through every note he left behind, Bobby DeBarge still sings, aching, eternal, unforgettable.
Willie Smith.
Willie Smith was more than a designer. He was a dreamer who stitched color, courage, and culture into every thread. Born in 1948 in Philadelphia, he rose to fame as one of America's first black fashion visionaries, dazzling the industry with bold, joyful designs that spoke to everyday people. Yet behind the runways and flashing cameras, Willie carried a quiet burden, concealing his sexuality in an industry still steeped in prejudice. By the 1980s, he was a fashion force. Icons like Madonna, Spike Lee, and David Byrne didn't just wear his clothes, they wore his heart. Willie lived authentically in private, surrounded by a tight-knit community of fellow artists. But as the AIDS crisis spread, it silently dimmed his light. In 1987, already weakened and frail, Willie pushed through exhaustion to complete his final sketches, each one a fragile piece of the dream he still clung to. That spring, in a small New York hospital room with sunlight spilling across the sheets, he held a friend's hand and whispered, "I design dreams." Now I rest." He smiled, then closed his eyes, like a final runway show, fading quietly into eternity.
Willie Smith was gone.
But the real tragedy wasn't just his early death, it was the silence forced upon so many like him. Still, his legacy lives on, in the spirit of Willie Ware, in the fearless designs of today's young black creatives, and in the stories we choose to tell. These 19 individuals were more than names. They lit up stages, screens, runways, and sets. They were black queer artists who dared to live boldly in a world that often looked away. Before their time was up, illness stole their voices.
But their truth remains.
Which story moved you most? Whose spirit still lingers in your heart? Share with us, because their stories don't end here.
You carry them forward.